Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to yet another Harriet Tubman talk. We're gonna, like Rebecca said, we're gonna start with the land acknowledgement. The Harriet Tubman Institute for Research on Africa and its Diaspora recognizes that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of indigenous nations. The area known as Tikaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Welcome again. And I'm going to quickly introduce our speaker and a bit on what her research is, what her presentation is about. And then how it would happen after that introduction, she would give her presentation. Please, if you have questions as you're listening, please write them down. If you think you're going to forget and you don't have a pen and paper, please write it in the comment section. And then after she's done presenting, we would have a brief question and answer segment. Our presenter today is Tka Pinnock. She's a PhD candidate in the Department of Politics at York University. Her doctoral project lies at the intersection of feminist, political economy, political ecology, and critical development studies, where she explores the everyday politics of life work. Her research interests extend to diaspora studies and community engaged research. This presentation today is an offshoot of a MITAX scholarship that she got, or MITAX grant that she got. It's on the necessity of Black educational space. Join me in welcoming Tka Pinnock. Thank you. Welcome, Tka.
Thank you so very much. Thank you everyone for joining. Good afternoon. I'm joining from the very sunny island nation of Jamaica. So my background is almost true, but I also want to note that it is about to storm. So I am hoping and keeping fingers and toes crossed that I don't lose electricity or Wi-Fi, because sometimes when it gets to storming, the power go. So let me just share my screen and we'll get started here. Okay. Fantastic. So to preface this presentation, I want to share a bit about my high school experience in Canada. So in high school, I was one of 9 Black students in my graduating year at a Greater Toronto area high school. And of the 9 of us, only 4 went on to post-secondary education. And during my undergrad, I was one of 3 Black students in my cohort. And by my 3rd year, one of my colleagues had left the program. Now, my personal story is not unusual, nor is it new, I think, for Black Canadians, because research has long shown that there's an achievement gap between Black students and their colleagues. For many in the Black community, the goal has been to get Black students out of high school and into post-secondary institutions. But what happens to Black students after they get in? How are they experiencing post-secondary education? And this is sort of the crux of my research, and in part, what I'd like to discuss today. So, I want to acknowledge at the very start that there is a gap between Black students' aspirations and their sense of efficacy, right? So 94% of Black youth want a degree, according to data from Statistics Canada. But that data also indicates that only 60% believe that it's possible. Right? There's also an achievement gap between Black students and their peers in terms of completing and attaining post-secondary education. So Black youth are the least likely to graduate from post-secondary in comparison to their white and other racialized peers. The University of Toronto, in a recent study, or it's a few years old now, shared that 50% of its Black students that come from the Toronto District School Board, which is Canada's largest school board, do not graduate from their programs. And a similar study by York University came to a similar conclusion, that there's a high attrition rate among Black post-secondary students. And as others have argued, most prominently Dr. Carl James, who's in the Faculty of Education here at York University, in an economy where 75% of new jobs will require a post-secondary education, what we have is a dangerous gap between Black students and their peers, right? So if you look at sort of the direct trajectory of Black students from kindergarten to PSC, what we notice is that there are similar high school graduation rates for Black students and their peers, but there is a lower entrance rate of Black students in comparison to their white and other racialized peers. And then we also see that Black students are the least likely in comparison to South Asian, East Asian, and white students to graduate university, such that as we move through the pathway as Black students, there are less and less of us. So the question becomes, how do we get Black students across the finish line? And certainly one community strategy has been to provide Black students with scholarships as a means to lower or eliminate financial barriers to achieving post-secondary education. Now, I was fortunate enough to get a MyTax internship in which I partnered with a national Black organization to do an evaluation and research study of their national scholarship program. They were broadly interested in the impact of their scholarship program on the recipients. And so I held focus groups and individual interviews with 23 scholarship recipients. Most of them were current students attending universities across Canada and in the US. Some were pursuing undergraduate degrees, others were in graduate programs and professional programs, and a few participants were recent graduates. Now, just a bit more about the research. What the organization wanted to do through this evaluation and research project was to develop intentional strengths-based programming that would increase access, engagement, and graduation rates for Black students. They wanted to understand the impact of their scholarships and support initiatives on recipients' post-secondary experience, to assess the supports that Black post-secondary students needed to complete their studies, and to also understand the factors that influence and contribute to Black high school students' post-secondary educational plans. Right, so we had there are more women who participated in the project than men. And I think that also says something about the Black post-secondary educational experience. We know that Black women are in some respects doing a lot better than Black girls, and Black women are doing better than Black men and boys in the education system. And of course, there was a wide cross-section of students. So I think I got some good data from them. So what are some of the findings in terms of, did the scholarship program impact Black students' access to and affordability of post-secondary education? Now, I learned a few expected things, such that, scholarships eased financial burdens, and it allowed students to take advantage of extracurricular and experiential opportunities, such as internships. However, receiving a scholarship did not influence a student's decision to go to university. And to borrow a quote from a respondent that I think summarizes the sentiment shared by all of the participants really, they were going one way or the other. So it's important to note that for these students, while the scholarship monies are important, the cost of post-secondary education was not a deterrent for them to going to university or college. They were okay to take on student loans or student lines of credit or to work part-time. In fact, most of the research participants did use all of these options to fund their post-secondary education. They also applied for multiple scholarships such that it was the total sum of scholarships and not one particular scholarship that made a difference to their educational costs. And I'll get back to this later on in the presentation, but I think it's worth noting that Black students who are in, just based on this study, Black students who are in post-secondary education had always planned to pursue university or college and found multiple ways to then pay for that, but they weren't dependent on sort of funding. They weren't dependent on scholarships or bursaries to pursue those ambitions. What I did find surprising though, is how Black students articulated scholarships. And for a lot of them, scholarships are more than money. And hopefully you can see some of the quotes here. One, it gave them agency. So less debt meant that when Black students entered the job market, they could hold out for an employer that they believed was inclusive and diverse. It also meant more freedom in choosing a community to live and work that would support Black well-being and belonging. And I'm not sure if it's because I was talking to these students. I did this in 2021, so we were still dealing with the height of global anti-Black racism and activism in the Black community against that. BLM was certainly in the mainstream. We were dealing with the ramifications of the murder of George Floyd. So I think students in that moment were also connecting their educational experiences and what scholarships meant for them, also in the context of what was happening. And so there was a lot of emphasis on, when we are done this part of our journey, we want to be able to have some agency in what comes after, in where we work, in where we live, and the type of life that they can create for themselves. Second, scholarships allowed them to build social capital, which they thought was vital to leveling the playing field through providing opportunities to be mentored and to build their networks. Scholarships proved to be a strategy to combat the systematic inequities they faced in the education system. And one of the quotes that I'm sharing here is from a student in law school that talked a lot about, as smart as they were, as deeply as they felt their self-efficacy in terms of pursuing this career, they understood that there were a lot of systemic barriers against them as a Black student. And so they thought, or they saw the potential in being connected to Black and other professionals who could be mentors and sponsors for them. And so getting these types of scholarships allowed them to be able to build those kind of networks and to make those connections. And finally, and this was specific to Black community-based scholarships, they created a Black academic space where Black student success was normalized. And it allowed Black students to feel like the rule and not the exception, which yielded psychosocial benefits for them as students. So scholarship recipients felt like they were part of a larger community of Black students. And this was even more important for students who were the only one or one of a few Black students in their program or their institution. One of the things that I came to realize, and sort of intuitively known based on my own experience, is a lot of Black students in Canada, as much as we don't talk about sort of PWIs, so predominantly white institutions, the way that they do in the US because of how their higher education system is set up. There is certainly, I think, most, if not all, universities in Canada could be considered predominantly white institutions. And that came up a lot in talking to the scholarship recipients who participated in this research, that they were either the only person in their program, one of very few in their program, and certainly members of very small communities of Black students at their institutions overall. And so there is this normalization of Black academic success that comes through getting Black community-based scholarships that was certainly beneficial for them. So during the evaluation studies, students also indicated non-financial supports that were and still are crucial to their success that they wish the organization and other like organizations would provide. Some of these are certainly tied to points I've raised earlier about scholarships being more than money. They talked about increased opportunities for networking with Black professionals in their field, as well as with other Black students. Likewise, mentorship was important. And interestingly, while they saw value in being mentored by Black professionals, many of the students mentioned how they were mentored, and in some cases, sponsored by white professionals. And so for them, it is the act of mentorship and sponsorship that is much more important than the identity of the mentor. So one student shared how a white woman professor really supported her to get to medical school, and not just in terms of, writing reference letters and whatnot, but really took an interest in her during her undergraduate years, helped her sort of navigate how to choose courses and how to plan a path towards med school. Another student who's now in law school talked about how a white male professor really helped him to discover and navigate to a successful career in psychology, even when his own family saw psychology as sort of a futile pursuit. And so while they welcome and would really like to have Black mentors, it's really mentorship and sponsorship that is important to them. And finally, the respondents also discussed the need for mental health supports. And there are two students who spoke really profoundly about this and shared their stories. Interestingly, both are in STEM. So one is a young male grad student in STEM, and talked a lot about, in fact, we spent most of his interview talking about how he felt, and to quote him, like he was carrying the burdens of 400 years into the classroom. And that, in his program and in his classroom, he feels like he's representative of the entire, Black race, because he is the only one in his program. And so he thinks his colleagues and the faculty members that he works with, when they see him, they don't see him as just a student. They see him as representative of the community from which he comes. And so he feels particular pressures to succeed in his program, because he thinks to fail is not just a mark against him, but a mark against other young Black people and the Black Canadian community generally. And the young woman who shared her story, she actually talked quite a bit about her mental health issues and challenges that she's always faced, but found a way to really navigate through those in high school, but they've manifested themselves worse now that she's in undergrad. And she shared that she felt it was a weakness to actually share with her professors and to use the institutional resources that were available to her, because to admit to them that she had mental health challenges that she was facing would mean that she had somehow failed as a Black woman, because according to her, Black women are always resilient. We have Black girl magic. We're always excelling as Black women. And so to seek out into institutional supports that are really to her benefit would go against the narrative of Black excellence and Black girl magic that she's been fed. And I highlight these two because we don't talk enough about how the narrative and the imagery of Black excellence and Black girl magic and Black male joy actually follows students into the classroom, and the psychological pressures that puts on them to succeed, and how it really shrinks the space for them to stumble and to fail. And I just wanted to highlight as well that the students had a preference for Black community scholarships in comparison to institutional or other non-community scholarships. They thought Black community scholarships focused on them as individuals and their life stories and their ambitions. And more importantly, these scholarships recognized their labor in the community, particularly around volunteerism and the social justice work that they do. So where does this all lead us? I think one, as Black organizations or those who work with Black organizations, is shifting to quality over quantity. And by this, I mean spending time as Black organizations, particularly those who offer scholarships, spending time on building out the experience of the scholarship. It isn't all or necessarily about the dollar amount of the scholarship, but certainly what else can be provided to scholarship recipients or those who applied but didn't win to offer them supports and resources. How can organizations build meaningful long-term relationships with recipients? And this is in no way meant to minimize the importance of the scholarship dollar figure, but particularly for students in professional programs, grad studies, or what's considered to be elite undergraduate programs such as engineering. What can we offer students as Black organizations beyond money? We're also thinking about, or should also think about, cultivating opportunities for networking, mentoring, and professional development. The research participants couldn't stress this enough. Even more than the money, this is what they were looking for. They want to meet their peers. And if you remember that a lot of Black students, they are the only one in their programs with very few exceptions. They'd like to meet Black professionals in their chosen field. They're looking for guidance about what is possible and how to navigate their way to successful careers, because they understand very intimately that getting the degree is not enough. I think another important thing, going back to Black mental wellness, is allowing Black students to stumble. One of the things that really came through is that the burden of success can be crippling for students generally, but perhaps more so for Black students who believe they're representative of their race in academic and other educational spaces. The burden can get in the way of them actually or fully realizing and authentically finding success as students. So how do we help our Black students just be and get to the finish line in their own way and on their own terms? And Black academic spaces are potentially the safest place for our students to talk about the burden of Black excellence and be allowed to stumble, and dare I say it, be allowed to even fail. Some of the recipients talked about creating opportunities for Black students in post-secondary education to be able to connect to Black students in K-12. And unfortunately, or perhaps it's not unfortunate, but while the research doesn't help us to answer the question of how to get more Black students entering post-secondary education, many of the recipients talked about reaching back and connecting current university and college students to those who are younger than them, because they see themselves as modeling possibilities. And so if we model what is possible and feasible to younger Black students, then that may be one way to bridge this divide that we see, this gap between ambition and efficacy. And finally, which I think it's the crux of what I'm trying to argue, is having some intentionality vis-a-vis creating Black academic spaces. And what do I mean by a Black educational or Black academic space? Very simply, it is a space where Black student success is normalized and made to feel regular. And part of this normalization is also making failure and the non-traditional part of the success story. The recipients talked a lot about going to their scholarship ceremony for this particular scholarship that I was evaluating, but other Black community scholarship programs. And those ceremonies being very pivotal and transformative. It wasn't, it's not the glitz or the glam of the ceremony that did it for them, but it's the idea of being around Black people who are just like them, bright, keen, doing well in a space that centers student success. It was about being in a space outside of home and outside of school, in community, where Black being was just enough, where they didn't feel like the unicorn for being academically successful. They weren't sort of touted as the token, right? And so I think a challenge that we have in terms of creating more of these Black academic spaces is finding a way to be and to make our students who are doing well academically to be celebrated and to feel special, while also making that moment of celebration seem regular and normal. So it's how do we make Black success and Black student success be celebrated, but not because it's an exceptional occurrence. And I think Black community organizations, in fact, there is some research that I did with Dr. Giselle Thompson, who is now at the University of Alberta, looking at Black students in the Greater Toronto area who participate in youth programs in Black-led organizations. And one of the things that came out of this research, right, which I think supports what I found with Black post-secondary education students and the argument I'm trying to make here, is finding more spaces where Black students can just be, where they're not dealing with either low expectations or the usual stereotypes and narratives around Black academic achievements, spaces where they connect with other Black students who are doing what they're doing, so that the road isn't as lonely for them. And these are spaces that's not necessarily created at colleges or universities, and not spaces in their households. And so to sort of end the presentation, you know, it's going back to that idea of, or the question of, how do we get our students across the finish line? And I particularly like this photo. It's of the Black graduation at the University of Toronto, I think from a few years ago. Aside from the, you know, the imagery of just a line of Black students and Black academic staff and Black faculty of the university crossing over that finish line. It is always, I think, a reminder for me, and I hope a reminder for those of you in attendance, that helping Black students get in, whether to university or college, is just as important as helping them stay in and cross that finish line. And so just to share some interesting reads for you, both York University and the University of Toronto have been doing studies and looking at Black student attrition at their universities. I also refer you to two reports done by Carl James out of the Jean Augustine Chair in the Faculty of Education that looks at Black student achievement in K-12 in the Greater Toronto Area. And finally, reference to the article that I co-wrote with Dr. Giselle Thompson on the educational rights of Black Caribbean diasporic youth in Toronto. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions and your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tka, for an amazingly eye-opening research. Reminding us that it's not about just getting Black students in, it's about keeping them in and helping them through to the finish line. So we're gonna have a brief question and answer session. Please, if you have questions, can you use your icon to just raise your hand, and then I'd call you in order, and then we could continue. All right, we have one hand. Amanda?
Yes. First, can you hear me? My headset
Yes,
has
we
been,
can.
okay, excellent. First, Tka, fantastic presentation, very interesting work. Thank you very much for sharing it. I don't know if it is, this is something we can read somewhere else to like read the whole paper or research, or if this is kind of still in the works. I didn't get if that was the case. I know you spoke about something at the end.
Yes, so this is, I haven't written anything about it yet. Research takes so long that I'm learning that. So hopefully by the end of the year, I will have some sort of publication out that's publicly available for folks to read. Thank you.
So yeah, no worries. So that was the first question. I wonder if I can go quickly into what I really wanted to ask, just because I'd be interested in reading for sure when it's published. But so I'm currently also working. So last year, it's continuing this year, we started the Black Student Mentorship Program within the health department or the Faculty of Health at York University. And it's an all Black student run program, which was created specifically with everything that you just mentioned in mind. And so I recognize a lot of the things that you talked about, but in addition, these conversations, these focus group that you have had are extremely interesting and things that I don't really read about a lot. And so what I was wondering is, there are more and more of these different discussions that are being had and research being done. And a lot of time I just kind of find them by accident or by happenstance. And I'm wondering, so same thing, I'm also kind of having discussion with Dr. Carl James on new research he's doing that's very close to what you're doing. But of course, each of these research seems to rightfully deal with something specific. There's so many ways that they can go, right, to kind of understand the issue as a whole and finding solutions. And I'm wondering if you have suggestions or thoughts about how we can stop working in silos. Sometimes I think it happens by accident, just we don't know that somebody else is doing work. But I wonder if it's a question of creating platforms, if it's a question of like just knowing that there's so much work that is done now. If you have thoughts about how these different ideas and these different researchers and these different things can kind of exist in a place where we can kind of know about each other's work and see how we can either, well, support each other and there's a word I'm looking for, I can't, sorry, and kind of fill all the gaps where we figure out where all of us can kind of fit in the work. I hope that made sense.
And I don't think I'm going to have a really good response to your question, because I think it's the forever problem of how do we talk to each other and share ideas that we have. Glad to hear that you're doing something in your faculty around Black students. I think a lot of that is happening, and sometimes it's good to be doing it in our very specific spaces. Now, I should say, I used to work with the Jean Augustine Chair, and I used to work with Dr. Carl James. So when this MITAX, I'll come back and be very specific in my response, but the MITAX came around because Scotiabank was looking at Black post-secondary education. I'm not quite sure why that was how that came to be on the bank's side, but they were funding my research and other research specifically around Black post-secondary attrition and how to do that. So I think there are lots of conversations happening in corporate Canada, certainly across post-secondary institutions around how to stem this. But this work for me is really community-based. And I think a lot of what we do has to return to that in some sense. There are Black community organizations all across Toronto and outside of the GTA, where people have been doing this kind of work for decades, trying to figure out how to get students out of high school into post-secondary, how to get them into, successful career paths. And so I think whatever we do in the institutions that we're at, we always have to go back to community, because I think at the root of it, Black youth, Black students are always connected to community in one way or the other, whether it's community-based organizations or faith-based organizations. And I find sometimes when we get into academic circles, we tend to keep the work we're doing in channels that are legible in the academy. And sometimes we don't return to where our own work kind of started, which is community. So I think that's my personal feelings. Like maybe that's the place we need to be connecting, because that's where our young people are and start from many times before they get here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And would it be okay if our team contacts you as well to
Oh, sure.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Any other questions? Please raise your hand and I will call you. Rhonda?
Hi, thank you. Hi, Tka. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Hello, Rhonda. Thank you.
Yes, I really enjoyed your thinking around the creation of Black spaces. And so I had like a two-part question, I guess, about what is your thinking around the potential of creating kind of like an HBCU-ish type thing in our context. And number two, if not that, some kind of pathway or program that facilitates that Black thriving in the post-secondary space.
Yes. No, honestly, I don't know if the numbers, I mean, HBCUs thrive in the US or thrived in the US because we know there's lots of research about the challenges that they're currently facing, and lots of them have closed down in maybe the last 2 decades and continue to do so. I don't know if statistically speaking, we have the numbers to support sort of a Black university or college in Canada. Most of the Black population exists in Toronto, and we already see how those numbers kind of play out in our own university settings. But I think there is certainly space, and we should be thinking about how to create Black spaces in our universities and in our colleges, where students can connect with each other in a deliberate way. So I think we often find each other in these sort of haphazard ways, and you hope you bump into someone in class. You hope there are grad students who are, very active in their programs and create that like student-led spaces that think about how to support Black students. I think there has to be some intentionality and some money, real money at the institutional level around creating these spaces that support Black faculty members in leading these spaces, and not expect it to be an add-on to the work that they currently do, and to really think about how to connect what's happening in K-12 to our post-secondary spaces. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I know as well as you do that sometimes our institutions talk about certain initiatives to support Black students, and they're wholly underfunded, and very taxing to Black staff and Black faculty, because it's not seen as something in addition to what they're doing, but something that should just be ordinarily a part of their own work. And if I can critique York a little bit, they have this, I know Professor Olowoye made a face, she's like, do you want to do that? But I look at sort of, you know, they have the, I think, Black and Indigenous postdoctoral fellowship that York has created. It only takes 2 Black students a year.
Only 2?
Only
So
2 Black and 2 Indigenous.
Oh, wow, 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 wow.
And those postdoctoral fellowships are not connected to those students then, or to those scholars rather, then getting like permanent jobs in the university. You do your postdoc and then, you know, somebody help you thereafter in finding a tenured job. So, you know, I start to think about like, really, are institutions really interested in creating these Black academic spaces and these Black initiatives that will really move the needle on Black academic success? And returning to, I think the point I keep going back to, how do we support Black community organizations and Black-led spaces that currently exist to continue to do the work that they're doing and to do it much deeper and much wider.
Thank you for that. And I'm thinking about with the postdoc thing that you were talking about the ways in which a lot of time that external applicants have to already be connected to faculty members inside of an institution that they didn't attend. And so that in of itself, connecting with this short timeline, most students who would want to apply can't, because they can't find a quote unquote supervisor when they don't know the person.
Right. And again, only 2. And I mean, I know it's, you know, it's all competitive, but it's, if we're seriously thinking about how to increase Black achievement at the post-secondary educational level, then are we really putting the dollars and cents that's needed for that to happen? As one example. I mean, our undergraduates also face a different scenario as well. If you're in a classroom where you're still one of few, but you also don't see a lot of Black faculty in your program, then how do you dream certain dreams when there's no model of that dream for you? I think that's something we still go back to, and it's how do we create those opportunities for young people, both in academic spaces, but also in community spaces.
Right. Thank you for your answer. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. Anyone else? Do we have anyone else with a question? Amanda?
I'm open to let anybody else speak, because I could ask a lot of questions for hours. So if anybody else wants to speak first, please do. I'm wondering, just while you were doing when you were doing this focus group, what the mood was like what was it like to talk to these kids, and like, did they also come up, because sometimes that comes up, I guess, with ideas and thoughts about what they really want. I know that they spoke to, you had spoken about some of so they had a preference, for example, for Black community-led scholarships. Are there things that came up that were surprising? Are there things that they came up with that you thought, okay, this could go back to the corporations and all of that?
Yeah, some interesting things. One of them, they actually really enjoyed the opportunity just to talk about their experiences and to connect with each other. At certain points in the focus group, it actually became less about sort of responding to the questions I was asking and more about them being able to meet each other and to connect with each other. So there were lots of students in undergrad were thinking of law school or med school, and then would meet somebody in law school or med school in the focus group and wanted to connect after about how to get there, how to do that. So there were those opportunities, which I think goes back to Black students wanting to network with each other and to meet each other. Another thing that came out, and I think I kind of mentioned it in the presentation, there are lots of thinking about career and life and anti-Black racism in thinking about how to create their careers and their lives after. So some of them, particularly the ones in professional programs where tuition was very high, they talked about debt, but they talked about debt in terms of like, I remember one student saying, she's like, I don't want to go into lots of debt because I don't want to work at a law firm where as a Black woman, I'm not welcomed, I'm not respected, I'm not treated fairly, but because I'm indebted, I have to take this job. One med student said to me, she's like, yeah, I also don't want to go into, and these were separate conversations, so people thinking separately about it. One med student mentioned, she's like, I would like to, live in a city and raise my family in a community where we're going to be treated well as Black people, and like Black well-being is going to be supported. And I don't want to have to take a job and build a career somewhere that is not in alignment with that, because I'm so indebted. And so scholarships and sort of funding for post-secondary wasn't just about not wanting to owe money, but it's like what owing money does in terms of the decisions they would have to make about life and career after that. I did talk about the mental health piece, but those two, and I've been thinking about how to get those two students to talk more about their stories, because it was kind of heartbreaking to me to hear a young Black woman say, I'm not going to go to accessibility services, and I'm not trying to get institutional support or tell my profession, tell my professors that I'm dealing with serious anxiety issues, because I think that that's a failure as a Black woman. Like Black women don't have mental health issues. We are always resilient and we're always strong. And it got me thinking, it's great to keep talking about Black excellence and to make sure that our young Black people know that they're capable of that. But what happens when they feel like they're not meeting the standard that Black excellence, the notion of a Black excellence has created? How do we support them when they think they're anything less than their absolute best, right? It's like, how do we also just allow them to be excellent, but to just be? And I think the pressures of Black excellence is much more intense in the post-secondary space than it is in the secondary space. It's one thing to be one of like 20 students in your class, or one of 100 Black students in your school, and it's a completely other thing to be the only person or one of two in your program, right? And how to not always be excellent in spaces like that.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you very much. Do we have any other person with a question? Any other questions for Tka regarding her research? Anyone? Okay, I'm going to bring my question in.
Okay.
There's a part that you spoke about that reminded me of class this week, actually, where I had students talk about in the wake of the protest in 2020, a lot of companies hiring maybe Black targeted hires because they suddenly realized the level of discrimination that had been going on in their inability to have, Black people in their companies. And so a student asked the question and said, but would those hires translate to Black promotions? And it's something similar to what you're saying about, getting Black students in the door, and they're just the checkbox of how many people you have in, but how many are we getting out the door? And what is that translating in for like towards their future, what's it contributing towards their future, not just extra debt. What is it doing for them? And I'd like to pick your mind a bit. Apart from Black targeted hires, which again, some of my students had a problem with because they thought it just meant I'm not good enough and you're just putting me in. So how do I know? A student asked me, how do I know that I'm being hired for my knowledge and not just as a checkbox? To which my response was, why should you care? But I would like to know your opinion on the whole idea of keeping, I know you spoke about representation, but keeping Black people in the race till the finish line, not just to get in the race.
Actually, one thing in response to Amanda's question previously, but connects to what you're talking about with the emergence of corporations caring about Black people. A lot of the scholarship recipients actually critiqued the fact that private entities started to give scholarships to Black students because they felt they were being used as a PR sort of ploy, and that these organizations had only started to give money to Black students because they wanted to be performative and not because they actually cared about Black students. So they'd put them on their websites, they'd probably email them once to, put them in a newsletter, but there was no a follow-up thereafter. And I think that's one of the reasons why they also have a preference for Black community organizations, because they felt those organizations actually cared about them beyond just the transaction of giving them a scholarship. In terms of keeping us in the race and beyond, and this will vary away from the research and the presentation, and I guess speak to my own biases. I personally, and I think anecdotally, a lot of us will have experiences that suggest that we shouldn't trust institutional initiatives. And I don't know if I'm the one that's frozen. Am I frozen? Okay. I think we have to be very suspicious of institutional initiatives that try to get us in the race. And I say that because those initiatives, even when they're started by Black persons, tend to be co-opted by the institution and then becomes transformed into the institution's version of what getting in the race and staying in the race should be. So LAPS at York, for example, has quite a number of initiatives around getting Black students in and trying to support them while they're doing their degrees. But I think we still have to be not suspicious, but one should be apprehensive about how successful those are, because it tends to meet the needs of the institution and not the needs of Black students and not the needs of Black young people. So in the corporate level, yes, you have targeted hirings at universities, you have other targeted hirings in corporate Canada, but it's to meet the institution's needs. And there really isn't any support to meet the needs of our young Black people. And that's where sponsors and mentors become very, very important. And I'll say, again, I think for a lot of these young Black people, they didn't care about being sponsored or mentored by Black people generally. It was the act of mentorship and sponsorship that was important, but I think a lot of that is missing in some of these initiatives and some of the targeted hirings. And as someone who sat on a hiring committee for targeted hirings at York, I can definitely tell you it's through the institutional eyes of what those Black people coming into the space should be doing and how they should be performing, but I won't get into that. I don't know if that suffices in terms of our response, but
I understand.
Mentors and sponsors, I think, are very important. I'll quote one recipient who said, "I just want somebody to hold my hand to get me across the line."
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from anyone else? Natalie?
Hello, everyone. My question, I placed it in the chat, and also I also wanted to apologize. I tried to get in and I couldn't get in until the end of your presentation. So I was like, oh my God.
It happens.
Anyway,
It happens.
It happens, definitely. I'm part of the Environment and Urban Change Black Caucus at York. And our group has been doing a lot of work in terms of trying to shift things in the program itself, right? Our requests are the same requests everywhere: curriculum change, more Black professors, opportunities to network, that kind of stuff. And so I'm wondering, like, I'm wondering if you, okay, I'll just ask the question. The question is, in terms of, we've gotten to the place, or I've gotten to the place of, we spent this amount of time, amount of energy struggling and to get our agenda heard, our lives heard, basically, and seen. And what I'm finding is that what we've given them, they've taken into and added to their framework. But there's very little in terms of action. So for folks like ourselves, right? And I'm thinking about Black futurity, and I'm thinking about the kind of ways in which the struggle leaves you bereft and you don't have any energy for anything else. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around the kind of organizing that can happen within educational spaces. Big question.
Yeah, I know. And yes, big question. And I think a question that we sometimes keep going back to. So I have two thoughts. One, and I think I'd said this at the top of our conversation, that I think we have to center community, and not community in educational spaces, like Black communities, Black community organizations. I think we have to keep them in the work that we do, because that is a space that we, as challenging as that space or those spaces can be, I find it's a space that we all kind of go back to, whether it's to be refueled or to make changes out of mainstream spaces that we happen to be in. And so when we are doing or organizing in and around education and in educational spaces, how do we bring community along? How do we get those who are doing some grassroots work day in, day out to be connected to the things that we're doing? But the second part of my response to your question is, I think we constantly need a healthy dose of the institution. And my time as a PhD student and as a PhD student at York, I think has made me somewhat of a cynic, because I find our organizing gets co-opted. And so Natalie, I'm sure you were a part of the organizing to get Black targeted hirings in your faculty. Yes. And yes. I don't know what the experience has been in your faculty, but I can certainly tell in my department, it is the institution's version. And I was just saying this before, it's the institution's version of who those Black people are and what counts as Black scholarship, which is not always aligned with what, the activism was around, right? They tend to serve very different agendas. The people who get pulled in by the institutions, unfortunately, sometimes just become reflections of who the institutions want, which isn't necessarily sort of what we were asking for. And those of us who have collectively been, on the front lines asking for certain things. And so while the institution will co-opt the activism, and some of it will lead to the kind of changes we want. I think it's always, where are the spaces outside of the institution for us to make those kind of differences that we want to see? Because honestly, I don't trust the institution to ever authentically take on the requests and the demands that we're making. Because the demands that we make requires the institution to not be. And it's in its own self-interest. It will always co-opt what we're demanding, as opposed to really meeting those demands. So where we always, I think as Black communities, we've always had spaces outside of mainstream institutions where we have cultivated for ourselves, to nurture ourselves, to have our young people progress. I mean, if you go back to the 60s and 70s across Canada, when they started to, Black organizations started to create these supplementary educational programs, you know, the evening programs, the Saturday programs, the after school programs. Those were those were meant to be political spaces, not just places to kind of learn the nuts and bolts of what one would learn in the classroom. But, you know, as Andrew Kahinde, who does he's a Black Studies chair in the UK, really talks about it. Those were political spaces for Black students to discover themselves as Black people, and to think about the political demands and changes that they wanted to make and to enact it in that kind of space. I don't know, I think it's a roundabout way of saying, I think the work we do in institution is important. But I think we shouldn't believe that work is going to get the institution to become the institution we'd like it to be, and that we have to keep returning to community spaces that are curated by us to cultivate us, and for us to make some political demands and change in those spaces as well. Does that make sense? I feel like
Completely.
I ramble sometimes.
No. Completely makes sense. In your talk, did you touch on the need for Black educational spaces, like solely Black educational spaces, kind of like how they have it in, I'm thinking post-secondary, of course,
Yeah.
right now.
And Rhonda, who I think is still here, asked a question about HBCUs or something akin to that in the Canadian context. And I think in short, my response was, statistically, I don't think we have the numbers to, you know, if we're really being honest, could we make a university or college viable with our numbers? But nonetheless, I think there should be initiatives and spaces that are created just for Black students, and that there needs to be actual dollars put towards that. And in short, to reiterate, you know, that work is currently being done in institution for free by Black faculty, by you, Natalie, by Rhonda, and you know, Amanda and other students and faculty members who are on this call and that we know about. Free mentorship, free labor to support Black students from beginning to end. So how do we get the institution to actually put financial supports into that, and to recognize and compensate people for the labor that they do to cultivate Black educational spaces and make them work?
So true. So true. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Oh, wait. One more that I put in the chat around the Black student alliances in schools.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a future in that? Like, you know, because we're going to have, hopefully, like in my daughter's generation, she's been to the BSAs.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually went to an award ceremony given by the TDS, through the TDSB, where they gave these awards to all these Black students. It was just like the most amazing experience, right? Very, very positive space. And I wonder if you see a future for the BSAs as they move into maybe post-secondary education, etc.
I do. One of the things that the respondents in the study talked a lot about was wanting and needing to connect with other Black students across their programs, across institutions, across space and time. They want to be connected, and they want to find community, because that is the thing that's actually keeping them in the institutions. Knowing that there are like students, like-minded students on the same journey, just like them. And at the end of the presentation, I showed the picture of the Black graduation at U of T, which I think is really symbolic of what we're talking about. BSAs, both in the secondary school space and in post-secondary space, I think have existed and have allowed generations of Black students to thrive, and will continue to do so, because we're in search of community, particularly in these spaces. And there's nothing more supportive on that journey than other Black students who are also on that journey. But again, it's how do we support them to thrive, and how we enable those who are doing free labor to be also compensated for, or to be recognized for some of the labor that they're doing in that regard.
Great answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions or comments? Do we have any other questions or comments?
Do you have a last comment, perhaps, or an invitation, perhaps, because I'm sure there's multiple people in here that perhaps would be interested, but the more I've heard Tka speak, and then now with Natalie and Rhonda, etc., I'm wondering if there could be an interest, perhaps, in having an opportunity for a number of us to meet that are doing this kind of work. Again, going back to my first idea, where we can talk about, to Natalie's point, where we could talk about the future of BSAs, that may include faculties and executive on the different BSAs, and what that can really look like, what we can actually build from within the faculty. But to Tka's point, also connecting it to, we're not living our whole lives in academia, connecting it to our communities as well, and bringing it back in, if there's an interest to do something like that.
Natalie?
I think that's a great idea. And the Black Caucus, we were looking at actually having a meet and greet for everyone, for all Black students on Wednesday, the 17th of November from 3 to 4 p.m. We're planning to have food and stuff. We're just gonna start making the posters right now. So I don't know. So it would be great if folks could join us in that, or if I could have access to your email addresses and stuff like that, so that I could send you the invite as well. But yes, definitely would want to connect.
Can we get an official invite? And Rebecca, would that be okay to send to Lisa? Thank you.
Fantastic. I like this. Now, I'm in the Department of Politics, and there are literally 5 Black students in the entire program over like the span of a decade. So we don't really have enough people for a caucus, but we're happy to join other grad students and to meet and work together.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Tka, for an amazing presentation. Thank you to everyone who has asked the question, has contributed to the discussion. Hopefully we get more research out of this, because from the chat room it looks like there are a lot of interested parties. So hopefully we get even more research out of this. And then I'd just like to give a quick announcement that I thought I gave at the beginning, but apparently did not. Please, everyone here, note that very soon, the Tubman Institute of York University will be starting her very own peer-reviewed journal. And so we will be encouraging you to send in your research, your work that you would like to have peer-reviewed and published. So please, whatever you're working on, keep us in mind. And when it's officially ready, we would put out an announcement. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming today. And hopefully we see you at Tubman Talk next week, which is in school.
Thank you. And if I may just add again, thank you very much to the Tubman Institute for the invite and the platform, and many thanks to all of you for coming out today and for the great conversation.
Thank
you.
Thank you, everyone.